Welcome back to the Keep Going podcast with Vin Kennedy. I'm your host, Vin Kennedy, and today we have a solo episode, obviously. My favorite guest. Recently, I read a book called Die with Zero. It was written by Bill Perkins. He was a trader, very successful trader, made a ton of money. I guess to some people, it's unconventional. Some people are going to have thoughts right away pertaining to things that he says in the book, and he kind of just like calls you out on it right away because you hear Die with Zero and you think like, that's a selfish person, like leave nothing for nobody else. And the first caveat with that, because that's what I thought in my head as well, is like, oh, well, what about your kids? The money you were giving to your kids was never your money. It was their money. It was money you were giving to them. So you can't count it as your own money if technically that's what you're giving to them. So I really like the principle. I really liked a lot of the book. Some of the book I was already living. Some of the book I'll definitely add. He also was on the Modern Wisdom podcast with Chris Williamson, which I'm fully obsessed with. That's, give it a listen if you want it. But anyway. So one thing that he really harps on that I have really understood lately is the idea that like, as you get older, your experience diminishes. So the one example he gives is a friend loves skiing. So his friend I believe he talks about like how his friend in his 20s or 30s would go on a ski trip and just say in one day he would go down the mountain 12 times. Now in another decade, and when he's 40 or 50, he's going down the mountain half the time. So that trip diminished. The amount of fun you're having is quantifiable depending on who you are, what you're doing. But if you think about it, you were going down 12 times, now you're going down 6. So as you age, things change and what you can enjoy changes. And that's not to say you can't pick up different hobbies and do different things, but when it's pertaining to something that once gave you enjoyment that you want to continue doing, that's going to change. Your whole experience with that thing is going to change. Something personally I just witnessed. I went on a Europe trip with two very close friends and my mother, and they're into their 50s and 60s and early 60s. I don't think anybody's gonna hear this. My mom doesn't even watch these things, but there was a lot of walking. We went to Positano. It's in Italy. It's on the Amalfi Coast, and it's just you're on a mountain. It's just stairs all day. Me, I loved it. I got to run on a mountain. It was like different. It was a challenge. Even taking the stairs down the first day, it was like 2,000 steps of just like a straight steep decline, and then going back up was obviously a steep rough incline, and I loved it, but it was taxing. And I think it helped the people I was with show them that like your physical health and the shape you're in and what you can do matters. And if I'm feeling this now, what am I going to feel next year? Coming back from the trip, everybody was like, I need to get healthier. And like, that was just like the thing that really just kept ringing throughout the trip. And we had to even honestly modify the trip to an extent, obviously nothing crazy, but like things change within the trip because of how much physical demand, the stairs, the mountain, the climbing, really took the toll that it took. So right there, that's a prime example of it, where that trip, and it was something I said too, where the trip is obviously you're going to Italy. It's not going to be a cheap trip. I knew it was going to be expensive. I've spoke on this many times, but I knew if I go on that trip in 5 years with my mom, who would now be, I'm not going to say the age, but 5 years older, it's a way different trip and it's a different experience, and it's less that you could do and it's less that you would be able to explore and see and enjoy. Even Bill Perkins will tell you, and as I will as well, you're not, emptying your bank account to do all these things now to not do anything at the later years of your life, or in a decade, or in 5 years, or, you're not experiencing all of life in 1 year and then whatever, we'll figure it out next year. That's not the premise of this book, but the book is to kind of just highlight the importance of, a lot of people say like, oh yeah, I'll go to Italy one day. And like, I could have been that person, I'll run a marathon one day. Like, we could be those people. There's areas of life that we all do it with, and it's just experiencing the experience when it presents itself. And when you may think money is a hindrance or it's going to be expensive, that's not the only reason why you shouldn't do something, or you should do something sometimes. Again, you're not emptying your bank account to do certain things, but at the same time, if an opportunity presents itself, yes, there is a financial aspect to it, but you have to weigh that scale of, well, that means I could do this thing in 5 more years or a decade and it's half the experience. Or yes, financially right now, it isn't the best thing in the world that I could do, but it's not going to crush me, and it's something I could do, and I'll make the money back, or or whatever, you have to weigh those scales, and you have to live life through the lens of delayed gratification and experiencing experiences, because if you just live in delayed gratification, you'll never enjoy anything. And if you just live in experiences, you'll never progress in anything. You need delayed gratification. I obviously run a lot, so you need it in running. You need your easy runs to build up to then run the race. You can't run races every weekend and expect different results. And it's just true in life. Another thing he goes into is that scale that we live with, and I somewhat touched on with, when you're in your younger years, you have less finances, but you have more youth to experience experiences. And as you get older, generally people have more finances and less youth to experience the experiences. So, you're not going to go hike through Hawaii when you're in your 70s. That's something you could do, backpacking through Hawaii in your 20s. And yes, to get to Hawaii might be expensive, but on the other end, you could backpack through Hawaii, which is the cheaper option, and you have your health to kind of lean on to experience that trip. It's all about making things work for you and making it make sense. Something crucial that it just rings through in my head and really a way I live is that I know at some point, obviously, a family and other engagements are going to be getting a majority of my time, because right now I live in this world of it's me. I can be very selfish with my time. I can do whatever I want, basically whenever I want, even financially. It's just me. So I hear it all the time of oh, wait till you get X, Y, and Z. And to kind of caveat that is, that's why I'm doing all of these physical things now, because I know at some point, at some season, things are going to slightly change. My priorities have to shift. My responsibilities are not just going to be for myself. So it's kind of living the season you're in and understanding that you're in that season. When you're in your early 20s, early 30s, you can kind of be more selfish with your time. Obviously, some people, certain situations financially, you're a little handicapped on what you could do, but that's the time to experience the more physical side of experiences, or just physical events, whatever you want to really get into with that. You're not going to go through Europe, and most people aren't going to go through Europe and backpack or live out of hostels when they're in their 50s and 60s. It's something you do at a younger age, and it's just understanding that and knowing where to plug these things in to make them work if it's something you want. Again, this isn't all about traveling, it's just how I'm relating it personally. And something Bill Perkins touches on is your max experience is in your 20s and 30s, especially the latter years of your 20s and early 30s, because you are probably in your quote unquote prime. You're generally making more money than you were in your early 20s or just out of college, or if you didn't go to college, any of that. And so those are the prime years to experience. So it's you don't want to be a full yes man. You want to obviously have it make sense for you, but that's kind of how I'm personally living. I do the air quotes around prime because that's just, I have a bone to pick with the whole idea of that. I think just like chasing the best version of me, I never want to think I'm in my prime. I always want it to be something that's a little out of reach that I'm always attaining for, and not live in the glory days, but just to have something that I'm chasing. I never want to settle, especially in my physical endeavors, because if I think I'm in my prime, I need to do these things now, and when my prime ends, then it makes sense that everything starts to diminish. And of course I'm going to hit an age where things do diminish, but I rather that be not some made up man-struck idea that I have, because your mid 30s is your prime for running. No, because if I start crushing races at 40, I don't want to play that what if game. Another thing he touched on that I really like the idea of is how people will leave money to their children, which is a great thing, and I'm not saying not to do it. I'm not saying that I'm not going to do it. But something better is, again, if your prime time to enjoy experiences in your 20s and 30s, take your children on trips in those formative years, not really formative years of 20, 30, but in those years that they will remember, and you'll create memories with them. It's more impactful to do things like that. Something that I personally, a couple of years ago, realized is I rather create memories out of gifts than give people just money or whatever. I think it's more impactful. I think it's more important at the end of the day. Those are the things you're going to remember. You're never going to remember what somebody gave you, or money that was given to you. You're going to remember the experience you had with the person and how that person made you feel. So to live that out, I rather go on a trip with somebody or do something, spend a day with somebody. I think that's way more impactful and way more meaningful. And another step forward. So what he was basically getting at is, if you're going to give your child $10K when you pass away, or $20,000, and just say at that age, at that time, most people are going to be in their 60s, or just say between the 50 to 70 range when their parents pass away, you're going to give them $20,000. Or you could have done 2 giant trips with your children, your whole family, and those would have been memories you get. Because at the end of the day, think about $10,000, $20,000 is not a small amount of money, but think about how fast that money could be spent on bills and just kind of like the small things that you will never remember anyway. Personally, I rather, if in the position, I rather gift my children, or whatever at that point, nieces, nephews, who even knows at this point, kidding. But I rather gift them experience. I rather give them memories with me, and with our family. I think when it comes to spending money on trips, or spending money on experience, or spending money on things, we all kind of get fixated on the number, and we don't think of where else we may spend that money where it's bringing us no value. So for example, for me personally, I don't drink anymore, but when I was going to local bars, which is just scary that I was even doing this, but I was spending $400, $500 in a weekend. How? I don't know. I was drinking my face off, and I just don't even know how that money was spent. Food, Ubers, it adds up quick. But now I look at like a $400, $500 flight, and I sometimes get hesitant, and then I'm just like, I was spending this money in a weekend anyway. Now, does that mean always buy the flight? Absolutely not. But if it's going to be an experience, it's worth taking a second look at. Just 2 more key things here. One thing that Bill Perkins hits on, that I really like the idea of, is that parts of you die before you die. So he relates this to, I think the example he uses is even like sleepovers with friends. So at one time you had your last sleepover as a child with a friend, like staying up late, playing video games, or playing board games, or doing whatever. You had that last experience, and you didn't realize that would be the last time. It's not like the last day of school. You knew this is the last day of school, and that would be that of high school, of middle school, of elementary school. But a lot of pieces of us and versions of us die that we don't even realize. Same with sports. Some people don't know when their last baseball game is going to be, if you play on multiple teams, if you're going to play in school, and then you might not make it to senior year. You might stop playing it sophomore year or junior year. It's just ideas like that, and it's the same thing with spending time with people. You don't know when your last day with that person's gonna end. You don't know the last time you'll see a person that unfortunately passes away sometimes. So it's the idea that life is fragile, and to really be in experiences. And there's a quote, it's not really a quote, it's more of like a phrase, I forget who even said it, but it's something that I do personally, is like, I remind myself, I'm like, be intentional of being in the moment. And if you could say that in your head, you're living in the moment, because to have the awareness to say that and be there, you're creating space and being there. But I just think it's a really, really unique thing, and we kind of take it for granted. For example, my last time going out at a local bar, I did not know that would be my last time. I had no idea that I would just stop drinking for a year. Or now it's been longer than a year, but there's so many examples like that in life, and with friendships and memories and experiences. There isn't always a known end date, and I think that should make you live more intentionally. A quote from the end of the book is, "The business of life is the acquisition of memories." And I think that just sums up this whole book and kind of what I'm saying here really, really nicely, because that's what it's about. No one remembers the money you have in your bank account. This is a corny saying as well, and it's always said, and it's cliche, but people don't remember the money you gave them, the gifts you gave them. They remember the way you made them feel. And you remember the memories you had, and it doesn't have to be just with other people, but even with yourself. And that's more impactful than the materialistic stuff and the other, honestly, bullshit that sometimes we hold in high regard in a situation or in a social setting, just because it's the norm. It's not easy to kind of disconnect from that sometimes, and of course sometimes we get caught up and we forget, but That's really what life is. The business of life is the acquisition of memories. A side note here that it kept coming up for me is, I know people probably looked at my Instagram while I was in Italy and like, why would you run I ran every day. Why would you run every day while you're in Italy? And to me, that's the best way to explore. And I think that was probably my favorite part, was the day I got to Rome. I think I ran 10 miles through Rome. Like, to me, that's the best thing. It's my favorite thing in the world to do. And it just lets me explore and like see new places, do new things. Just that's a game changer. And to caveat that, and why I even brought that up, is because how you experience is your own taste. It's your own way of doing, and no one could tell anybody else how to do anything really, but especially how to experience experiences. Because if going and getting gelato brings you joy, which it also brought me joy, and going to eat pasta and going to see sights and go see the Colosseum, that's an experience. That's experiencing experiences, and you're there, you're doing the thing. And if you want to get up early on vacation and go run through a brand new place to see more sights and kind of also just work out, like, do your thing. There's no one has your answers but you. And I think this is something that I'm really leaning into and really understanding. And I think there's certainly a place for mentors and leaders and coaches and obviously parents and friends alike, but no one has your actual answers but you. And if you go inside and actually ask yourself what you want out of whatever it is, out of a trip to Italy, out of a career, you'll find your answers. But if you're always asking other people, and this is a place I was in personally, I would ask everyone with this simple, it could have been a fight with an ex-girlfriend, and I would ask a million people, what should I do in this situation? And no one can actually tell you what you want to do, because you need to do the inner work to talk to yourself and understand and dissect the situation and see which avenue you want to go down. You can't obviously predict outcomes based on what you think is going to happen, but you could do the inner work to understand and know the situation from your viewpoint and make decisions based off of that, and just move from that space. Because a lot of this is just figure it out as you go. It's what life is. Life is adjustments. But yeah, life is just adjustments. No one has it all figured out. When you think you have it all figured out, you're fucked, because you can't possibly, because you don't know what the next day is going to bring. You've never lived that next day. You've never lived that next moment. Things change in a blink of an eye, and sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes good, sometimes maybe shit. But yeah, you have to just live and be there and do the thing and adjust accordingly, and whatever that means for you. And I think a lot of us, especially in the self-growth space, play this game of like, we know all the answers. And personally, I never want to know all the answers, because that means I know nothing, because it's not possible. Of course, you could experience things and give people what happened to you, and what may happen, what may occur, but you truly have no idea in most situations, most scenarios. A little bit of a tangent there, but I guess that was supposed to come up because I don't know where that came from. But yeah, Bill Perkins, Die with Zero. The book was great. I think that's really all I got.